Tonight, we begin with a story about something most of us will face at some point in our lives, and it's not comfortable to talk about: the slow fade. That moment when you realize the person sleeping next to you feels like a stranger, when the spark that once made your heart race has dimmed to barely a flicker. Tonight's story follows Sarah and Michael, a couple who discovered that 10 years of marriage had somehow transformed their passionate love into polite coexistence. They weren't fighting, they weren't angry. They were just existing in the same house, sharing the same bed, going through the motions of a life they'd built together. Sound familiar? Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to hear from people around the world who find comfort in these stories. Sarah and Michael weren't unique. Statistics tell us that couples in long-term relationships often struggle with intimacy after the honeymoon phase ends. Work stress, daily routines, and the simple passage of time can erode what once felt unbreakable. They'd become roommates who happened to share a mortgage and a last name. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, mechanically stirring her coffee while Michael scrolled through emails on his phone. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was worse than that. It was indifferent. When he kissed her goodbye, it landed somewhere near her cheek, perfunctory and distant. She watched him drive away and felt nothing. That's when she knew they were in trouble. That evening, after another dinner eaten mostly in silence, punctuated only by discussions about bills and schedules, Sarah did something that surprised them both. She closed her laptop, looked directly at Michael, and said the words that would change everything. "I miss us." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Michael looked up from his phone, really looked at her for the first time in months. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. They talked about how they'd stopped seeing each other as lovers and started seeing each other as business partners in the enterprise of daily life. They admitted they couldn't remember the last time they'd laughed together, really laughed until their stomachs hurt. They confessed that they'd been going through the motions of intimacy without any actual connection. The spark hadn't died overnight. It had been slowly suffocating under the weight of routine. But here's what made their story different from so many others. Instead of accepting this as inevitable, instead of resigning themselves to a passionless existence, they decided to fight for what they'd built. Sarah suggested something radical: a weekend away. No phones, no laptops, no distractions. Just them, trying to remember who they used to be together. Michael hesitated. Work was demanding. There were deadlines and meetings and responsibilities. But when he looked at his wife, really looked at her, he saw something he'd almost forgotten. The woman he'd fallen in love with was still there, just buried under years of taking each other for granted. He nodded. They would go away. They would try. The cabin Sarah found online looked perfect, nestled on the shore of a pristine lake, surrounded by towering pines. It promised the kind of isolation they desperately needed. The photos showed a cozy interior with a stone fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, and most importantly, no television, just books, board games, and silence. The kind of silence that forces you to actually talk to each other. They drove north on a Friday evening, the car filled with a nervous energy neither wanted to acknowledge. What if they discovered they had nothing left to say to each other? What if the magic was truly gone? What if this weekend only confirmed what they both secretly feared, that they'd grown into strangers who happened to share a bed? The weather seemed to mirror their emotional state. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as they wound through mountain roads, and the first drops of rain began to fall just as they pulled into the gravel driveway of the cabin. The building looked exactly like the photos, rustic and welcoming, with warm light glowing in the windows. But the approaching storm made everything feel more dramatic, more intense, as if nature itself was setting the stage for whatever was about to unfold. Inside, the cabin exceeded their expectations. The main room featured that promised stone fireplace, already laid with logs waiting to be lit. Soft furniture arranged to face both the fireplace and the massive windows that showcased the lake. The kitchen was small but well-equipped, perfect for intimate meals. And upstairs, visible through an open loft design, was the bedroom. One bed. They'd have to share it, really share it, for the first time in months, without the buffer of exhaustion or distraction. Sarah unpacked their bags while Michael explored the cabin, both of them moving carefully around each other, like polite strangers. The rain was falling harder now, drumming against the roof and windows, creating a cocoon of sound that seemed to separate them from the outside world. When Michael finally got the fire going, the flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for the first time in hours, Sarah smiled, a real smile. They prepared dinner together, a simple meal of pasta and wine, but the act of cooking side by side felt foreign after years of grabbing food on the run or eating in front of screens. The wine helped, not enough to make them drunk, but enough to soften the edges of their nervousness. They sat at the small dining table, the storm raging outside, and began to talk, really talk. At first, the conversation stayed safe. Work stories, funny things their friends had said, memories of vacations from years past. But as the evening progressed and the wine flowed, they began to venture into more dangerous territory. Sarah admitted she'd been feeling invisible, like she'd become just another item on Michael's endless to-do list. Michael confessed that he'd been so focused on providing for their future that he'd forgotten to live in their present. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the lake in brilliant flashes, followed by thunder that shook the cabin's windows. But inside, something was shifting. The barriers they'd built up over years of polite distance were beginning to crack. Sarah reached across the table and took Michael's hand, really held it. For the first time in months, his fingers intertwined with hers, and they both felt it. A spark, faint, but unmistakably there. They moved to the couch in front of the fireplace, the storm providing a dramatic soundtrack to their rediscovery of each other. Michael wrapped a blanket around both of them, and Sarah leaned into his shoulder, breathing in the scent that had once made her heart race. It still did, she realized with surprise. Underneath everything that had built up between them, the attraction was still there, just waiting to be awakened. The conversation grew more intimate as the night deepened. They talked about their dreams, the ones they'd shared and the ones they'd kept secret. They laughed at inside jokes they'd almost forgotten and shared fears they'd been too proud to voice. Sarah traced patterns on Michael's chest through his shirt, a gesture so familiar yet so foreign after months of careful distance. He caught her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm that sent electricity up her arm. The fire crackled and hissed, the storm raged outside, and slowly, carefully, they began to remember what it felt like to want each other. Not just physically, though that was returning too, but emotionally. The desire to share thoughts, to make each other laugh, to be vulnerable in ways they'd forgotten were possible. This was just the beginning of their weekend, the first tentative steps back toward each other. But already, something fundamental had shifted. The spark they'd thought was gone forever was flickering back to life, fed by honesty, wine, and the romantic isolation of a storm-swept cabin by the lake. The fire had burned low, casting longer shadows across the cabin walls, when Sarah finally voiced what they were both thinking. "I don't want to go to bed yet." Her words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to examine too closely. Michael's arm tightened around her shoulders, and she felt his breathing change, becoming more deliberate, more aware. They'd been sitting in comfortable silence for the past hour, listening to the storm rage outside, while the warmth of the fire and each other slowly melted away years of careful distance. Now, with that simple statement, Sarah had acknowledged what was building between them. The evening wasn't over. Neither of them wanted it to be. Michael turned to face her, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was tender, familiar, yet charged with an electricity they hadn't felt in years. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been all evening. The question seemed to encompass so much more than just how to spend the next few hours. Sarah looked into his eyes, really looked, and saw something that made her pulse quicken. The way he was watching her, with an intensity she'd forgotten he possessed, made her feel beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with being truly seen. "I want to remember," she whispered. "I want to remember what it feels like to be us." The storm outside seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Then Michael leaned forward, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it was like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them testing the waters of intimacy they'd neglected for so long. But then something ignited. Years of repressed desire, of polite distance, of sleeping in the same bed without truly touching, all came rushing to the surface. The kiss deepened, became hungry, desperate, as if they were trying to make up for months of lost connection in a single moment. Sarah's hands fisted in Michael's shirt, pulling him closer, while his fingers tangled in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The air between them crackled with possibility, with want, with the kind of raw attraction that had first brought them together a decade ago. "Upstairs?" Michael asked, his voice rough with desire. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. They climbed the wooden steps to the loft bedroom, hand in hand. The storm outside, providing a dramatic soundtrack to their ascent. The bedroom was bathed in soft moonlight, filtering through the skylights, the rain pattering against the glass, creating an intimate cocoon of sound. The bed, which had seemed so daunting when they'd first arrived, now beckoned like a sanctuary. Michael turned to face Sarah, his hands coming up to cup her face. "Are you sure?" he asked, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her cheekbones. The question was about so much more than just this moment. It was about them, about their marriage, about whether they could find their way back to each other. Sarah's answer came in the form of action, rather than words. She reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers trembling slightly as she worked them free. He stood perfectly still, letting her set the pace, his eyes never leaving her face. When she pushed the fabric from his shoulders, her hands smoothed over skin she knew as well as her own, yet felt like she was discovering for the first time. Michael's turn came next, his fingers finding the hem of her sweater and lifting it slowly, reverently, as if unwrapping a precious gift. The garment fell to the floor, forgotten, as his hands mapped the familiar curves of her body, reacquainting themselves with territory they'd claimed long ago but had somehow stopped exploring. The storm outside reached its crescendo just as they came together, the thunder masking their whispered endearments and soft gasps of pleasure. They moved together with the careful tenderness of lovers reuniting, taking time to savor sensations they'd forgotten could be so intense. Every touch was deliberate, meaningful, an apology and a promise wrapped together. Sarah arched beneath Michael's ministrations, her body responding to his touch in ways that surprised them both. He knew exactly where to kiss, where to caress, where to linger, but somehow it all felt new again. The routine of married intimacy had been replaced by genuine desire, by the hunger to please and be pleased in return. When she cried out his name, it echoed through the cabin like a prayer. Their lovemaking was unhurried, passionate, filled with the kind of emotional connection that transforms physical intimacy into something transcendent. They whispered words of love and want and need, promises to do better, to try harder, to never let their connection fade again. The rain drummed against the skylights above them, creating a rhythm that seemed to match their movements, their breathing, their hearts beating in sync once again. Afterward, they lay entwined in the rumpled sheets, Sarah's head on Michael's chest, his fingers trailing lazily through her hair. The storm was beginning to pass, the thunder growing more distant, but neither wanted to break the spell of intimacy they'd woven around themselves. They talked in whispers about everything and nothing, sharing thoughts and feelings they'd kept buried for too long. "I was so scared," Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible over the dying storm. "Scared that we'd lost it forever, that we'd become one of those couples who just exist together, without really living together." Michael's arms tightened around her. "We're not," he said firmly. "We're not going to be. This weekend, what we've rediscovered here, we can't let it slip away again." They made love again as dawn approached, slower this time, more tender, as if sealing a pact between them. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside washed clean and sparkling in the early morning light. Through the skylights, they could see the lake stretching endlessly, its surface mirror smooth after the night's turbulence. Saturday brought new possibilities. They woke, tangled together, Sarah's leg thrown over Michael's hip, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. The intimacy of the night had carried over into sleep, and waking up, pressed against each other, felt natural in a way it hadn't in years. They lingered in bed, talking and laughing and touching, reluctant to break the magic of their reunion. But the day called to them eventually. They prepared breakfast together, stealing kisses between scrambled eggs and coffee, their movements around each other fluid and comfortable in a way they'd forgotten was possible. The tension from their arrival had been replaced by something electric, charged with possibility and renewed connection. The lake beckoned through the windows. Calm now after the storm's fury, they decided to explore, to venture out into this new world that seemed to mirror their own transformation. Hand in hand, they walked the shoreline, talking about their future with an enthusiasm that had been missing for far too long. Plans were made, dreams shared, promises extracted and given freely. The weekend stretched before them, full of potential and rediscovered love. They had work to do, both on themselves and their relationship, but the foundation was solid again. The spark had been rekindled, fanned into a flame that promised to burn bright for years to come. In this remote cabin by the lake, they had found each other again, and the future looked bright with possibility. The second day, brought a clarity neither had expected. They woke slowly, naturally, without the jarring intrusion of alarms or obligations. Sarah's eyes opened first, finding Michael already awake, watching her with an expression she hadn't seen in years. Pure contentment. His hand was tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and she realized this was the first time in months they'd woken up actually touching each other. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered, his voice still rough with sleep. The endearment, once routine, now carried weight. She could hear that he meant it, really meant it, in a way that made her heart flutter, like a teenager's. "Good morning," she replied, stretching languidly against him. The movement pressed their bodies closer together, and she felt him respond immediately. The desire that had been rekindled the night before hadn't dimmed with daylight. If anything, it burned brighter, fed by the emotional connection they'd rediscovered. They made love again in the golden morning light, streaming through the skylights, slower and more exploratory than the passionate urgency of the night before. Every kiss lingered, every touch was savored. They were learning each other again, remembering what brought pleasure, what made the other gasp and arch and call out their name. Sarah discovered that Michael still loved having his neck kissed, that the spot just below his ear could make him groan with want. Michael rediscovered that Sarah's responsiveness multiplied when he whispered exactly what he wanted to do to her, how beautiful she looked in his arms, how much he'd missed this connection between them. The morning stretched into afternoon before they finally disentangled themselves from the sheets in each other. They were both glowing, flushed with satisfaction, in renewed intimacy, moving around each other with the careful tenderness of new lovers combined with the comfortable familiarity of old ones. Brunch was prepared together, Sarah scrambling eggs, while Michael worked on pancakes, both stealing glances and touches whenever possible. The casual intimacy of cooking together felt revolutionary after months of grabbing coffee and rushing out the door to separate lives. They lingered over the meal, feeding each other bites, talking about everything except the inevitable return to their regular lives. The afternoon called for exploration. The storm had cleared the air, leaving everything crisp and bright and impossibly green. They walked the perimeter of the lake hand in hand, pointing out birds and wildflowers like tourists in their own lives. When they found a secluded cove with a small sandy beach, Michael pulled Sarah close and kissed her deeply, pressing her back against a sun-warmed boulder. The kiss ignited something primal in both of them. Here, surrounded by nature, with no walls or schedules or obligations, they felt free in a way they'd forgotten was possible. Sarah's hands roamed over Michael's chest, reacquainting herself with muscles that regular gym sessions had maintained, but she'd stopped noticing. His hands mapped her curves through her sundress, remembering exactly how to make her breath hitch and her knees weaken. "Right here," she whispered against his lips, glancing around at their natural sanctuary. The cove was completely private, hidden from any hiking trails or boat traffic. Michael's eyes darkened with desire and something else, mischief, the same expression he'd worn years ago when he'd convinced her to sneak away from her own engagement party for a private moment. "Right here," he confirmed, his hands already working at the buttons of her dress. The fabric fell away like petals, and suddenly she was standing in the dappled sunlight, wearing nothing but confidence and desire. Michael's sharp intake of breath told her everything she needed to know about how he saw her. Beautiful, wanted, loved. They came together on the sun-warmed sand, with an urgency that surprised them both. The setting was primal, elemental, stripping away the last vestiges of the polite strangers they'd become. Sarah cried out Michael's name as he moved within her, the sound echoing across the water and coming back to them like a blessing from the universe itself. Afterward, they lay entwined on Michael's shirt, which he'd spread beneath them like a makeshift blanket. Sarah's head rested on his chest, rising and falling with his breathing, while his fingers combed through her hair that had come loose during their passionate encounter. The sun was warm on their skin. The water lapped gently at the shore. And for the first time in years, they felt completely present in the moment. "I love you," Sarah said suddenly, the words tumbling out with more emotion than she'd expressed in months. "I love you so much, and I'm sorry we let ourselves drift apart like that." Michael's arms tightened around her, and she could feel his heart beating faster beneath her cheek. "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I remembered, more than I thought was possible after all these years." They talked then about the future, about changes they wanted to make, about how to keep the spark alive when they returned to their regular lives. No more eating dinner in front of screens, no more going to bed at different times, no more taking each other for granted. They would schedule regular date nights, plan surprise getaways, make their relationship a priority instead of something that existed in the spaces between everything else. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they reluctantly dressed and made their way back to the cabin. But the intimacy they'd shared at the cove stayed with them, an invisible thread connecting them as they walked. Every brush of hands, every shared glance, every quiet laugh felt charged with meaning. Dinner was another shared endeavor, this time more elaborate than the simple meals of the previous day. Michael grilled fish on the cabin's small deck, while Sarah prepared a salad with vegetables they'd found in the well-stocked kitchen. They opened a bottle of wine, toasting to their rediscovered connection, to second chances, to the weekend that had already transformed them. The conversation over dinner was different than any they'd had in years. Instead of discussing logistics and schedules, they talked about dreams and fears and hopes for the future. Sarah admitted she'd been considering going back to school, something she'd mentioned years ago but had shelved when life got complicated. Michael confessed that he'd been thinking about changing careers, pursuing something more meaningful than the corporate ladder he'd been climbing. They were seeing each other as individuals again, not just as partners in the business of daily life. Sarah was remembering that Michael had always been ambitious, but also deeply thoughtful, someone who could make her laugh until her sides hurt. Michael was rediscovering Sarah's creativity, her passion for life, her ability to find beauty in the smallest moments. As night fell, they moved back to the couch by the fireplace, Michael building up the flames, while Sarah curled up under a soft blanket. But this time, there was no nervous energy, no careful distance. When Michael joined her, she immediately molded herself against his side, her head finding its natural resting place on his shoulder. They talked about their wedding day, remembering details they'd forgotten, laughing about the disasters that had seemed so important at the time, but were now just funny stories. They talked about their honeymoon, about the early days of their marriage, when everything felt possible, and love seemed like the only requirement for happiness. "I want to renew our vows," Sarah said suddenly, the words surprising even her. "I know that sounds cheesy, but I feel like we're different people now than we were yesterday. Better people. I want to promise to love this version of you, and I want you to promise to love this version of me." Michael was quiet for a long moment. his hand stilling in her hair. Then he tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "I would love that," he said simply, "more than anything." They began planning right there, curled up by the fire, sketching out a ceremony that would be just for them. Something small and intimate, maybe right there at the cabin where they'd found each other again. They would write their own vows, promises based not on the idealistic dreams of young love, but on the mature understanding of what marriage really meant. The evening deepened around them, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls as they talked and planned and dreamed. Outside, the lake was mirror calm, reflecting the stars that were beginning to appear in the clear sky. Inside the cabin, two people who had almost lost each other were busy falling in love all over again, planning a future that looked brighter than anything they dared hope for just days before. When they finally made their way upstairs to the loft bedroom, it was with the comfortable intimacy of lovers who knew they had all the time in the world. Their lovemaking was tender, unhurried, filled with whispered promises and gentle caresses that spoke of commitment, renewed, and passion rekindled. Tomorrow would bring their final day at the cabin, and then the return to real life with all its challenges and distractions. But they were no longer the same people who had arrived Friday evening, nervous and distant, and afraid they'd lost each other forever. They were renewed, reconnected, ready to fight for the love they'd almost let slip away. As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, the lake lapped gently at the shore outside their window, and somewhere in the distance, a loon called across the water, its haunting song a perfect soundtrack to their transformation. The storm that had brought them together was long gone, but the changes it had wrought would last a lifetime. Sunday morning arrived with a gentleness that matched their transformed hearts. The final day of their retreat dawned clear and bright, the lake stretching endlessly before them like a canvas of liquid silver. Sarah woke first this time, but instead of slipping quietly from bed, as she might have done months ago, she stayed pressed against Michael's warmth, watching the play of morning light across his sleeping face. When his eyes finally opened and found hers watching him, his smile was immediate and unguarded. No grogginess, no reaching for his phone to check emails, just pure presence, complete focus on her. "Last day," he said softly, but there was no sadness in his voice, only anticipation for what they would build together moving forward. They lingered in bed longer than usual, talking quietly about their plans for renewal. The ceremony they'd dreamed up the night before had taken on more concrete shape in the light of day. They would return to the cabin in a few months, maybe for their anniversary, and exchange new vows under the same sky that had witnessed their reconnection. Sarah wanted to wear something simple, maybe the white sundress she'd brought for this trip. Michael suggested they write their vows separately this time, surprising each other with words born from their rediscovered love. The morning unfolded with the lazy rhythm of people who had nowhere else to be. They prepared breakfast together again, but this time their movements were choreographed by days of renewed intimacy. Michael would brush past Sarah as she worked at the stove, his hand trailing across her lower back in a gesture both possessive and tender. She would lean into him when he reached around her for the coffee, pressing back against his chest just to feel his sharp intake of breath. After breakfast, they decided to spend their final hours exploring more of the lake. They found a small rowboat tied to a private dock, obviously meant for guests of the cabin. Michael rowed them out to the center of the lake, while Sarah trailed her fingers in the cool water, watching the cabin grow smaller behind them. From this distance, their refuge looked like something from a fairy tale, a magical place where transformations happened and love was reborn. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with shared understanding rather than awkward distance. They drifted in the gentle current, Sarah's hand resting on Michael's knee as he let the oars drag lazily in the water. The sun was warm on their faces, and the world felt infinite with possibility. "I keep thinking about Friday night," Sarah said eventually, her voice dreamy with memory. "How terrified I was that we'd come all this way only to discover we really had nothing left to say to each other." Michael's hand covered hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I was scared too," he admitted. "I kept wondering if I'd forgotten how to talk to my own wife, how to make you laugh, how to make you want me." Sarah turned to face him fully, the boat rocking gently with her movement. "You never forgot," she said firmly. "We just got buried under everything else, under bills and schedules, and the assumption that we'd always be there for each other, without actually being present with each other." The conversation that followed was different from any they'd had over the weekend. Not about rediscovering their passion or planning their future, but about the practical realities of maintaining what they'd rebuilt. They talked about counseling, about setting boundaries with work, about the small daily choices that would either nurture or neglect their renewed connection. Michael rowed them to a small island in the center of the lake, barely large enough for the single pine tree that grew from its rocky shore. They pulled the boat up onto the narrow beach and sat beneath the tree's shade, Sarah between Michael's legs, her back against his chest. The island felt like their own private world, a place where they could speak truths too tender for anywhere else. "I want to tell you something," Michael said, his arms tightening around her. "That first night, when you said you missed us, I almost cried, because I'd been missing us too, but I was too proud to admit it, too scared that if I brought it up, you'd tell me you were done trying." Sarah leaned back harder against him, her hands covering his where they rested on her stomach. "I would never give up on us," she whispered. "Even when I was at my loneliest, even when I felt invisible, I never stopped loving you. I just stopped knowing how to show it." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the water lap at their tiny island shore. A family of ducks swam by, the ducklings following their mother in a perfect line. And Sarah found herself imagining their own future children, if they chose to have them. Would they bring them to this same lake someday? Would they tell them the story of how Mommy and Daddy fell in love all over again in a cabin by the water? The afternoon sun grew warm enough for swimming, and they shed their clothes without the shy hesitation of Friday night. Now, they were comfortable in their skin, comfortable with each other's bodies, comfortable with the desire that seemed to simmer constantly between them. The lake water was shockingly cold at first, making them both gasp and laugh as they waded in, but their bodies adjusted quickly. They swam out into deeper water, Sarah floating on her back while Michael treaded water beside her, his hand occasionally brushing her arm to keep her anchored near him. The sun felt glorious on her face, and she realized this was the first time in years she'd felt completely relaxed, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. All the tension she'd been carrying, all the worry about their relationship, had dissolved like salt in water. When they finally swam back to their island, they made love on the sun-warmed sand with an urgency that surprised them both. The knowledge that their time in this magical place was limited seemed to intensify every sensation, every touch, every whispered endearment. Sarah arched beneath Michael's ministrations, her cries of pleasure echoing across the empty lake. And she didn't care who might hear. She was claiming her joy, her right to passion, her place in this love story they were rewriting together. Afterward, they lay entwined on the sand, their skin warm from sun and exertion, talking quietly about the life they wanted to build. Not just the big dreams, but the small daily choices. Morning coffee in bed on weekends, evening walks around their neighborhood, regular date nights that weren't canceled for work emergencies, the commitment to see each other, really see each other, every single day. The afternoon was growing late when they finally rode back to the cabin. Their final evening stretched before them, bittersweet with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring a return to reality. But they weren't the same people who would be returning. The weekend had fundamentally changed them, not just individually, but as a couple. They'd rediscovered not just their physical connection, but their emotional and spiritual bond. Dinner preparation became a celebration of their last night. Michael opened the good wine they'd been saving, while Sarah prepared their most elaborate meal yet. They cooked and laughed and stole kisses, the kitchen filled with warmth and the kind of easy intimacy they'd thought was lost forever. When they finally sat down to eat, they toasted not just to their weekend, but to their future, to the hard work ahead, to the love that had proven stronger than neglect. As the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, they found themselves back on the couch by the fireplace. But this time, instead of nervous conversation or passionate reunion, there was simply peace, the comfortable silence of two people who had found their way back to each other and knew with absolute certainty that they would never let themselves drift apart again. Sarah curled against Michael's side, her hand resting over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm that had become her favorite sound. Tomorrow, they would pack their bags and drive back to their regular lives. There would be challenges ahead, moments when the magic of this weekend would feel distant and they'd have to choose each other all over again. But they were ready for that work, now, armed with the knowledge that their love was worth fighting for, worth nurturing, worth celebrating every single day. The fire crackled softly, the lake whispered against the shore, and two people who had almost lost each other made quiet promises about the future they would build together. Their story was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The final evening unfolded like a love letter, written in firelight and whispered confessions. They had moved beyond the desperate hunger of their first night and the tender exploration of their second. Now, on this last night in their sanctuary, there was something deeper, a quiet certainty that settled into their bones, like warmth from the flames dancing in the hearth. Michael built the fire higher than usual, as if trying to store up every moment of light and heat for the cold reality waiting at home. Sarah watched him work, admiring the concentration on his face, the careful way he arranged each log. These were the small intimacies she'd forgotten to notice. The way his brow furrowed when he was focused, the satisfied nod when the flames caught just right. How had she stopped seeing these details of the man she'd married? "Penny for your thoughts," he said, catching her staring. The old phrase made her smile, a remnant from their early dating days when they'd spend hours just watching each other, fascinated by every expression that crossed their faces. "I was thinking about how I used to love watching you do ordinary things," she admitted, moving to sit beside him, on the hearth, making coffee in the morning, reading the newspaper, even paying bills. I was so in love with you that everything you did seemed important and interesting. Michael's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with the ease of years of practice. And then, somewhere along the way, ordinary became invisible, he said quietly. We stopped seeing each other's ordinary moments as precious. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire consume the logs with cheerful efficiency. The cabin around them felt alive with memory now. Every corner held a moment from their weekend of rediscovery. The kitchen where they'd laughed over spilled wine, the loft where they'd made love with renewed passion, the couch where they'd planned their future with the excitement of newlyweds. Sarah stood and moved to the windows, overlooking the lake. The water was dark now, reflecting the stars that had emerged in the clear sky. I want to remember this view exactly as it is right now, she said. I want to be able to close my eyes 6 months from now and see this lake, these stars, this moment when we knew everything was going to be okay. Michael joined her at the window, his arms circling her waist from behind. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. We should take a picture, he suggested, but neither of them moved to find their phones. Some moments were too sacred for cameras, too perfect to risk diminishing with technology. Do you think we'll be able to keep this? Sarah asked, voicing the fear that had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness all day. This feeling, this connection, when we're back home, dealing with deadlines, in laundry, and all the mundane things that seemed so important before. Michael's arms tightened around her, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear that always made her shiver. We'll keep it, he said, with a conviction that surprised them both. Because now we know what we're fighting for. Before this weekend, we were trying to save something we couldn't even define anymore. Now we know exactly what we have to lose. They turned away from the window, and Michael led her back to the couch, pulling her down beside him with a gentle insistence that made her pulse quicken. Even after 3 days of rediscovered intimacy, his touch still had the power to ignite something primal within her. She wondered if this feeling would fade again, if the spark they'd rekindled would eventually dim under the weight of routine. But looking into Michael's eyes, seeing the love and desire burning there as brightly as the fire behind them, she chose to believe in their strength. I have something for you, Michael said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. Sarah's heart stopped for a moment, wondering what surprise he could have planned. When he pulled out a small piece of paper, folded carefully, she felt tears prick her eyes before she even knew what it was. I started writing this yesterday morning, he explained, his voice suddenly nervous. After we talked about renewing our vows. I know we said we'd write them separately for the ceremony, but I wanted you to have something now, something to take home with us. Sarah unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Michael's handwriting, familiar as her own heartbeat, filled the small space with words that made her breath catch. Sarah, she read aloud, her voice thick with emotion. 10 years ago, I promised to love you in sickness and in health, for better or worse, for richer or poorer. I thought I understood what those words meant. I was wrong. I know now that love isn't just a feeling you have on your wedding day. It's a choice you make every morning when you wake up, a decision to see the person beside you, not as an obstacle to your happiness, but as the source of it. She paused, looking up at Michael through tears that blurred her vision. He was watching her intently, his own eyes bright with unshed emotion. Keep reading, he whispered. I promise to choose you every day, she continued. When you're grumpy before your first cup of coffee, when you leave dishes in the sink, when you cry at commercials with puppies. I promise to see you, really see you, not just as my wife, but as the extraordinary woman who still takes my breath away when she laughs. I promise to never again let the business of living overshadow the joy of loving you. The paper fluttered to her lap as Sarah launched herself into Michael's arms, her tears flowing freely now. He held her tightly, his own emotions finally breaking free as he buried his face in her hair. They clung to each other on the couch, the fire crackling beside them. Two people overwhelmed by the magnitude of love rediscovered. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah reached for her own pocket, surprising Michael with a shy smile. I guess great minds think alike, she said, producing her own folded paper. I wrote mine this morning while you were showering. Michael took the paper with reverent hands, unfolding it carefully. His voice was rough with emotion as he read her words aloud. Michael, I fell in love with you twice. Once when I was 25 and thought love meant never having to work for it. And again this weekend when I learned that real love means working for it every single day and finding joy in the effort. He looked up at her, wonder in his eyes. You wrote this for me. Every word, she confirmed. There's more. And so our story ends where it began, with two people who discovered that love isn't something you find once and keep forever. It's something you choose again and again through storms both literal and metaphorical. Sarah and Michael returned home different than when they left, carrying with them not just memories of passion rekindled, but the knowledge that their love was worth fighting for. 6 months later, they stood by that same lake, exchanging vows they'd written, with hands that knew each other's touch and hearts that had learned the difference between existing together and truly living together. The cabin witnessed their second beginning, just as it had witnessed their rediscovery. Their story reminds us that the spark never truly dies. Sometimes it just gets buried under the weight of ordinary days, waiting for us to remember that love, like fire, needs tending to burn bright. Whether you're listening alone in your car or lying next to someone whose heartbeat has become background music to your life, remember this: every relationship has storms, but not every couple learns to dance in the rain. Sweet dreams, and may your love story be one worth rewriting again and again.